you don't have to write them down or remember them, and we'll just keep track. You know, we'd like to get through the whole thing in about 90 minutes, so we have time after also for a little schmoozy, we have snacks and stuff. Okay, so Susan and Dave.
Okay, hi. So, yeah, we just recently almost completed the Mountain View Cohousing community, and I'll tell you more about that. But David and I got married in 1968, kind of at the height of the hippie movement and communes and that sort of thing. And this is by way of telling you how we got interested in co-housing. So at that time, Gracie Slick and the Jefferson Airplane had a communal house on the Panhandle in San Francisco, and we were living in Boston, and I thought, gee, we were getting married, wouldn't it be, wouldn't it be fun to move into a house, a great big old mansion with all of our friends? And David said to me, yeah, sure, go find the house. And I said, okay, and I did. So in fact, we did have a couple of years of living in a communal situation. Really enjoyed it. And so then we came to California and had a very conventional lifestyle in terms of being in single family homes and raising our kids. And then we became empty nesters, and I thought, well, gee, wouldn't it be fun to live in a community with all of our friends? And I didn't know anything about officially, co-housing, but that was kind of my concept back in 2003. But we didn't do anything seriously about it for a while. And then in 2006, for some reason, I decided it was time to do something. And by that time, I knew the word co-housing, and I also knew that there had been several attempts made in Mountain View and in Silicon Valley in general, which is where we're from, to actually do a co-housing community. And several of the groups had met, I mean, there were about 4 or 5 attempts. Several of the groups had met for a couple of years. None of them got off the ground because none of them could find land.
In fact, one of them went to all the workshops, Katie and Chuck.
Direct.
They do a series of development workshops.
We'll talk about that.
And they thought they were, and they spent $150,000 to do that. They thought they were on their way, and they had a verbal deal with the developer who again said, "I'm not going to do this. I'm just going to go to a conventional development."
Right. So anyway, I realized that I didn't want to be just another one of these groups. So I said, okay, the first thing is find the land, and then if we, because this is not always the way it's done. In areas where land is a lot more available, very often the group forms first, and then they go find the land. But in our situation, I strongly believe we had to find the land first, and then it would become feasible, because I knew there was a lot of interest. So, then began a 3-year search for the land, and what I did is, I didn't know that there are if I knew about it, I didn't know how to get to them. Developers that aggregate land so that they can do their developments, but I just didn't have access to that kind of real estate knowledge. So instead what I did finally, after not getting anywhere, is I actually, we had a preliminary group, and we knew that we wanted to be located in Silicon Valley. And so I took a plat map of Mountain View, and I walked every lot that had the right zoning for multi-residential. And I found the last undeveloped acre in downtown Mountain View to be an infill project, because it had once been part of a 12-acre farm, which were developed in the 1880s, excuse me, and was now the last undeveloped acre with a farmhouse on it. And so and this was in 2007, I wrote a letter to the woman who lived there, and the letter arrived the day she died. So, because she had lived there since 1926. So, I was contacted by her niece. She had no children of her own, but basically the niece was the executor of the estate. And so they told me, well, we're going to put it on the market, etc. Now this was 2007. The market, real estate market, was very hot. the land went on the market, and there were 12 offers. And we figured, well, you know, that's it. We're not gonna get this. I'm gonna make this a little shorter because we have a lot to cover. Basically, in a year and a half, several of the developers who had it under contract and are doing their due diligence dropped out because the city of Mountain View would not let them develop the lot to the density that they wanted. So finally, it was under contract with another small developer, and now it was getting to the end of 2008, and real estate had tanked. And all of a sudden, the site was a third less expensive than it had been. And this developer had gone through whatever he was gonna go through. He had essentially cleared all of his contingencies. And it was December of 2008. And I'd been following what was going on with this site because I was hoping they would get it. And I looked at David despondently. I said, well, I guess that's it. And then I said, well, maybe we should meet with this developer and see if he wants to build a co-housing community. And that was it. So we met with this small developer and spent the next 3 months negotiating what we call the collaboration agreement between what we would, I'm going to call it MVCC, Mountain View Cohousing Community, what we would represent, which was MVCC, and we formed an LLC, and what his development LLC would do, which he called Calderon LLC, because that's the address. And we worked out, you know, what would be the responsibilities of MVCC, and what would be the responsibilities of the developer. In the meantime,
And basically, what the developer would do would be to build it. We would design it, and we would provide a certain amount of financing, and we would provide all the people who are going to move in.
right,
So the attractiveness to him was, and when you do a development, you know, you put out all this money, you take these big construction loans, you build all this stuff, you put the flags up, and you hope they come fast enough before your construction loan interest eats up all your profits. And because we were in a real estate downturn, we now had a piece of property, and nothing was being built and nothing was being sold. So he now had a piece of land that, you know, he had a hold, and it wasn't clear how he was going to basically take advantage of it. So one of our key presentations to him was, if you collaborate with us and do this, we will guarantee a lot of financing, and we will guarantee having everyone to move in when it's done.
At the point that you were having this conversation, how many members or
we
people?
didn't really have official members because we didn't have the land. We were in conversation with our friends.
We had there were a total of 4 couples who were interested.
Right.
That you had strong interest in it.
That at that point had strong interest, and they were close friends of ours. And so, you know, again, we weren't doing any kind of outreach or organizational meetings or anything because I didn't want to spin my wheels. So anyway, but you know, again, I just assumed that we'd find lots of interest, and we did have some close friends who had expressed interest. So anyway, the developer, however, was unable to raise the money from investors, which is generally what developers do, in order to go ahead and purchase the land. And time was going along, and he was originally supposed to close escrow in December, and the sellers were getting kind of antsy because it was getting to be springtime, nothing was happening. And then the developer became very ill. He developed colorectal cancer. He had to have surgery. He was in the hospital. It looked like the whole thing was going to fall apart. And at this point, David and I decided, well, if this is going to happen, if we're actually going to do co-housing, we stepped up and we put in all of the money necessary to close escrow on the land. We literally were in the hospital room of this developer, getting him to sign power of attorney so we could buy the land.
Right, because we had a deadline the next day or two where the seller said, if you don't close escrow, we're going to just take your earnest money
And go bye-bye.
Find somebody else.
Right. So that is how we stepped into the inadvertent role of becoming the developers of MVCC, which we had no intention of doing when we started, but that's kind of how it evolved. So We closed escrow on the land in July of 2009, and 5.5 years later, the first people moved in December of 2014, to give you a time frame. So, since David and I had never done any kind of multi-residential development before, which is, we had built a few single-family homes, but this is a different animal. We hired people as consultants to help tell us what to do. And the first part of the project were multiple things. One is what's called entitlement, which is when the,
Okay.
go ahead.
Okay, before we do the job.
Yeah, I was just gonna tell you the parallel
Yeah,
process.
okay, go.
So one part of, I'm sorry, I am jumping ahead. First is designing it, you're right. And at that point, we started doing outreach to recruit members. Of the 4 couples that we started with, 2 almost immediately dropped out. So it was myself, David, and one other couple. But we started by just talking to friends and friends of friends and asking people, and by from July to December, we finally had about 8 couples. And our commitment, and we'll talk more about the financing, but the commitment to become a member involved a substantial amount of money. So it was a real commitment.
So let me just step in here then.
Okay.
Okay, because financing is, getting land is one thing, learning how to finance it is another thing. It's really a challenge, sort of thing. So there are basically, you might think of 3 or 4 phases of this kind of project.
Right.
1 is getting the land.
Right.
2 is designing it. 3 is getting your design approved by the city, or the agency that controls the area that you're in. The next one is getting your construction drawings done. And the 3rd is building it.
Or the 5th.
Okay,
But,
right.
and in parallel, all this time, you're also developing your human community. And there's an awful lot of time and effort that goes into that, in learning how to work together, and because you go through the whole design phase together. And we did that by hiring Chuck Durrett, who is kind of Mr. Cohousing in this country, and all the books back here that he's written. And he has a series of workshops that he takes people through to help them define what it is they want in their physical community and also in their human community, and how the physical augments or can't think of the word right now, supports the human community. And so, so there were lots of things going on in parallel. There was the recruitment of new members, there was the designing, going through the workshops, deciding what we wanted in our community, the vision of the community, and at the same time, starting what's called the entitlement process, which is getting approval from the, in this case, Mountain View City Council, to be able to build it. So we're going to talk more about that phase of it right now. And I think maybe this is a good time to cover the financing on it?
Yeah, well, but the question I have is, at the point that people, you know, different groups do it different, so sometimes you pay like $500 to be a member, and then entitles you to come to meetings that
Right.
decisions are made. But were you also asking for people for like their 10%?
Yes,
Yeah, we'll
absolutely.
go through that. So
Okay, great.
go ahead.
Yeah.
You have a question?
She's waiting.
She's waiting.
Oh,
Okay.
no, all right, yeah.
Hi. Okay, so anyway, once we get the land, one of the questions was, well, how much are these things gonna cost? And so I ended up, we hired the person who got sick, the developer who got sick. He went through an operation, he's been fine since. And so he agreed to consult with us on the project. And he and I sat down and spent basically 2 months doing the most gigantic spreadsheet you can imagine, trying to figure out what it was gonna cost. And we didn't, we had no design, so we didn't know what it was gonna look like. And so we didn't, we had to make some guesses. So we guessed we were gonna have about 40,000 square feet of development. We're gonna have an underground garage for about 40-something cars. We didn't know how many buildings it was gonna be, but we had the house, the farmhouse. And so based on his experience of what it took and how much it cost to build things, I put together this gigantic spreadsheet to try to figure out what the cost of the units would be. And it turned out we could build 19 units on the site. And so based on that, we came up with a pro forma of what our target prices were for the units. We had 3 different size units. We had small units, medium size, and large units. And being a bunch of bleeding heart liberals, we decided that we would actually make the cost of the smaller units less per square foot than the largest units, so that we'd have a more diversified economic group, which is exactly the opposite of what the developer would do. So anyway, so that's how we ended up with target prices. As it turns out, we did a pretty good job. We came in within, 6 years later, we came in within 16% of that number, which I think is pretty phenomenal. And so it's both good work and good luck. So the financial arrangement that Linda asked about is, and this is based on Katie McCammond's format. She has a whole seminar she gives on how to make it happen and how to finance it.
She calls it getting it built.
Getting it built. And you get a CD, DVD of this if you wanted to, as a group, and you start to investigate this more and go through it. And the way you do it is, in California, you cannot pre-sell units. In other words, the state protects the consumer against some guy putting flags up on the land and saying, we're going to build this wonderful thing, give me your money, and you give him your money, and then he goes away. Right? There's nothing there. So what California requires you to do is to, before you can sell any units, you have to have approval from the State Bureau of Real Estate. And you can't get that approval until you've got about half of it built. Okay, to prove to the state that you're really going to make this thing happen. So you can't take deposits on units. So the way you get around it, which is legal, is you get the people who are going to live there to give loans to the development organization. So we asked for 10% of the projected price of units from everyone that they came in.
Let me just back up for a second. Because the developer was no longer part of the Calderon LLC, David and I wore both hats, and we were very clear that there was a potential for conflict of interest, and we made sure everybody knew that we were both on both sides.
Well,
So we're collaborating with each other.
Well, we created total transparency in both.
Yeah.
And the way we did it also is we asked members if they wanted to put in investments in the development LLC, which a number did.
Right.
So that there would be a bunch of people on both sides of the deal. So it wasn't going to be the members versus the developers. A lot of the members would be the developers, so when they thought about whether the demands or things that bugged them were really important, they had to think about it in terms of themselves. So it's a way of getting rid of conflict of interest. It worked, actually worked quite well.
Right. But can I also mention the alternative structure of this one? Just quickly?
Sure.
Okay, normally, when I say normally, of course, I don't know how much is normal in this process. What Katie McCammond recommends, and I don't know if this is part of your experience as well, is there's usually only one entity, one LLC. And so all of the members or potential members who are going to be living in the co-housing are also in this one LLC. And it is much simpler, but we kind of inherited the structure.
Right, and we ended up with $300,000 in legal costs.
As a result.
As a result of this, we had, if I look at our legal
So I don't
costs,
recommend it.
it was very complicated, this collaboration agreement, what each group was going to do, and a whole bunch of things. We ended up with 5 interlocking LLCs, and it just became incredibly complicated. But we were able to manage the complexity, so that worked okay.
Right. And then if you have the one LLC, you're just basically like you're loaning money to that
Yes,
LLC.
yes,
Exactly,
yes.
exactly.
So-
I mean, yeah, at
so
that
there's-
point, you're investing in
You're
the
investing in
LLC,
the
so it's not a
yeah.
question of pre-selling.
Right, and what you would do is you would set up 2 classes, like we ended up doing 2 classes of shareholders in the LLC. One would be equity shareholders that get a return on the investment
Because they're investing.
because they're investing in, and you have to make a profit on these things, you never get construction on them. And then you have others who put money in as their loans, and their loans are, they don't get any part of the profit of money. So you have these 2 classes of
Right,
membership.
and that's against their unit.
Against
And
the-
exactly, and then that's used as equity in purchasing.
Right, and then the deal is, if you decide at some point that you can't go forward, you can withdraw from your membership, and your equity in then converts into a loan with some level of interest. And we ended up making the interest 3%, which we thought was going to be low. It turned out to be a good investment.
Right.
But in a 6% world, 3% didn't look very much. 1% world looked pretty good. So, but luckily everyone didn't withdraw for that reason. And And so we ended up with about 4 withdrawn members, and the deal is they didn't get their money back until all the units are sold. Okay, so that's the, that's the risk that they take.
Right, but the nice thing is that meant that people are putting in their money, and we made sure there were a lot of guarantees for the protection of this money, and that is part of our legal agreements. So again, that would be part of your legal paperwork. And that's
I'm not sure
important.
if the guarantees were with it.
Oh, we had several, that's legal. If you want to go back to the slides. Yeah.
Okay, so just to give you an idea for what we're doing is what this thing cost is our total selling price was just over 20 million for 19 units. The total cost to build it was about 18 million. Out of the 18 million, about 11 million was the hard construction costs. And the 7 million was everything else, and that includes financing costs, it includes entitlement costs, getting through entitlement, design costs, legal costs, marketing costs.
Land, the land.
And the land costs.
Land itself.
Right.
Everything else.
Right, so that's how it kind of breaks down between what are called soft costs and hard costs. The hard costs are your construction costs, in our case would be 11 million. The soft costs would be the other 7 million that we put in to get to construction, basically.
And what was the 20 million?
That was the selling price.
So there is a built-in profit for the investors.
So we had a fixed profit of 2.4 million for the investors.
How does the financing, how do people finance their investment in it? You can't get a mortgage, right?
No.
Well, people had to come up
Have
with
they come
cash.
up with cash?
I mean, that wasn't our issue. If they came in, they had to put up their 10%.
Right.
And however
Oh.
they did that, well, all they had to do is come up with a block of
But
money.
what about the rest of the $20 million?
Oh, the way that was
couples.
financed is, it's a good question. When we got to construction, to construct the project, we needed about 4.5 million in equity. And we had a construction loan for 13.5 million.
In other
So
words,
the members had to put up with the equity, the bank won't loan you until there's some money.
That's correct.
That's
That's
right.
right.
Exactly.
So we ended up with, the way that worked out, we had about 1.3 million from the group that helped buy the land. Then we raised about another 4.5 million from our members in terms of their 10% loans.
And some of them put in more because we had an incentive for them to do that, where they would get a little bit of a discount on our purchase price.
I just gave you a run numbers, 1.3 for the initial investment, about 3 million by member loans, and then our development partner, that's a whole other story. We had a development
We'll
partner,
get
which we'll get to that, put in 200,000 to make up for
So
the equity.
what was the 10%?
Well, let me just summarize just very quickly then. So if the just round numbers, if the target price was $1 million, then a person would have to put in 100,000.
Right.
So it
10%
was
down.
What was the target price? Because there's all these figures, I don't know which one.
Oh,
Okay,
well,
we had
three,
three different target prices.
because we had 3 different size units, small, medium, and large.
But the average target price was about $1 million.
Right,
That's
so
the way to think
if
about it.
that's right. So if you kind of average it out, $1 million was like the target price.
So if you think about $1 million, the complex would have cost 19 million, it cost 20. And then if you're going to get 10% of the 19 million, then you've got 1.9 million.
But the units didn't cost a million.
Yeah,
Oh, sure they
it did.
Now, let me just say something about that. When you have co-housing units constructed, they're gonna cost pretty much what the market value is of the unit. They're not necessarily less expensive. Consider they're gonna be at market value. Let me digress here for a little bit. So, we came up with these target prices when the market was really low. You know, real estate market was low. People really were doing a leap of faith that these units were gonna pencil out okay. We were building in downtown Mountain View, which, if you're not familiar with it, probably has the most expensive real estate in the Bay Area, in California, in the country. It's because of Google, LinkedIn, Facebook. It's a very expensive market. When we went in, we were pricing units, and they were just almost at market value in the depressed market. We had to build large, and one of the reasons is it's kind of the developer's dilemma. You have a certain number of units that you are allowed to build on a property, and that's due to the zoning. And people developers do try sometimes to alter the zoning. That's a long battle, we didn't want to get into it. So we were limited to 19 units, would have preferred to put in more. As a result, those 19 units had to generate enough money to justify building the project. And that meant we wanted an underground garage because we wanted to preserve a lot of open space. Any other developer would have had surface parking and it would have been totally covered in asphalt. We instead, we have a lot of gardens. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is that we are in an area where a lot of people have large homes, and so to move to a 2,000 square foot condo, which is a large condo, is nonetheless a downsizing. So the short story of this, which is amazing, is that because the market, of course, turned around during the 5.5 years we were doing this, and we had guaranteed the price to our members, everybody who bought about $300,000 under market value.
Right, but the 2 years before that, they were buying at market, or even a little bit under market.
Right.
So that was a...
So real estate cycles are extraordinarily unpredictable and also very, have a great dramatic effect on how these things go, which is why being a real estate developer is risky. So for us, it worked out great. We were able to start in the downturn and sell when it was a hot market. And that meant that people who were selling their homes to downsize, to move into our place, got really good money for their homes.
Right.
So they were very happy.
The other thing is just by going to the underground garage costs about $3 million.
Yeah.
And so, you know, so if you divide that into the 20 units, everyone's paying about $150,000 for the unit just for the garage. Okay, but it gave us, you know, we have, if you look at what we've done in Mountain View, it's nothing like it.
It's totally unique.
You know, our footprint on the property is very small compared to the size of the property. There's just a lot of open space.
And, you know, lots of gardens, orchards, organic.
The other thing we decided to do is we decided that we we have an emphasis on what we call the bones of the building. We wanted to build, this is basically, it's a 3-story, I'm just going to generalize, it's a 3-story building. The units are flats generally, and we wanted to build an extremely high quality building so that we had very good thermal insulation, we had very good acoustic installation.
Energy efficiency.
Energy efficiency would be very high. And that we would be light on the luxury trim. So that when people came in, if they wanted to make it fancier, they could make it fancier. But you can't make something fancy and get soundproofing or thermal proofing that isn't already built in the building.
Right.
So we did a lot in terms of integrity of the building. The building is extremely high integrity building.
Right, and it has passive solar. I mean, we could go into all the details of the energy efficiency, but I think right now we'd rather stick to how you get it
How you
built.
get it built.
Right, can I just one quick question?
Sure.
At the point that, so you and the developer actually decided to do the underground parking because you were having to build your performa based on certain assumptions, and that's a very expensive assumption to make.
Right,
Which is fine, but I'm just, so my question is that when the group came along, did anybody get cranky that you guys made some certain assumptions?
No, it was just the opposite. We already knew that people were very passionate about gardening and open space. And that again, nothing like that would be available because if a developer were developing this property, it would just be, there would be zero open space
Right.
because everything around it is that way.
Right,
So,
okay.
yeah. So let's go back to the financing. So basically, let's talk about the membership process because that's important. We would have socials, very much like this. We invite people to come and learn about the project. We would talk about our projections. I mean, at this point, you know, we were just in the process of designing it, so we didn't have anything to show except the site and our ideas. And for people who, and we said, look, this is a community where people want to know their neighbors. Come and meet us, find out if we are the kind of people you would like to have as neighbors. That's really the first and most important part of this. And then if people were really interested, we would ask them to become what we call associates, which is put in $500, non-refundable. Then you can come to business meetings, you can come to fun days that we had, and other various activities that we were doing as our group formed. After a certain period of time, if somebody wanted to then become a member, that's when they would have to put in their 10% and sign all kinds of legal documents.
But first of all, they'd have to apply for membership.
Right.
That's when we did credit checks, and then we had a consensus on them, because like many co-housing developments, we run on a consensus decision basis. And so we had a consensus on the members, and there were 3 different times we did not consensus on the members. And in those cases, we generally gave their $500 back.
Yeah.
So, I know it wasn't their fault. Pardon me?
What did you tell? It wasn't a good match.
It wasn't a good match.
I mean, as Linda said, there are some people, or maybe it was Sandy, I'm sorry, there are some people who don't have the temperament to be in a co-housing
So
community.
maybe they're collaborative enough, they really have to have their own way. Or they have to always speak up at meetings to be heard, that's not very good.
Right, exactly.
Or
Or their egos are.
or in one case, it was someone who, oh, this group's gonna take care of me in my old age.
Yeah,
That kind of thing.
yeah, right.
I have a question. If, once you're in the unit and you wanna sell one, then does everybody have to, is it again?
No.
We don't have any deed restrictions on selling.
We don't have any age deed restrictions or anything like that.
Right, so the situation is what way you try to do it, and we'll see how this works out, because we're just beginning.
Yeah.
But we do have other examples.
Right,
But do you have to approve of somebody?
no. So the way what will happen is and this is the way it's worked out at Pleasant Hill Co-housing, which is a good model,
Very good model.
well-run
Yeah.
co-housing.
Yeah.
Is that we'll give tours of co-housing periodically, and people who are interested will give us their names, and we'll have a mailing list to keep them up to date with what's going on. And then when someone's ready to sell their unit, we'll be able to go to this database of people and find people who would like to live in co-housing. And if it's done right, you never end up going to the open market. And you've got people who already know co-housing, you've had a chance to meet them.
You encourage them to come to meals and meet everybody else.
Right, and so you're sort of getting people oriented, and people can decide whether this is really for them or not before you just turn it over. So that's the theory of it. Self-selection is a big theory, or a big concept in co-housing, is that if you're very open and transparent, and people spend time with you, and they see how you operate, and you meet a number of them, most of the parties, or meet everybody, then they self-select. They generally say, no, this is not for me. And in our case, we certainly had more people say, this is not for me, than we did
Oh, yeah.
us saying, you're not for us.
Oh, by far.
So, I think that's the case. And in fact, for the 4 couples that started this, only 2 of us ended up doing it. And the rest of the 17 parties were people that we had no idea were interested in this before we got going on it.
Which
It's very typical.
Yes.
Which we were warned was very typical, and of course, I didn't believe it,
And
but.
Chuck told us, he said, your friends aren't going to stick with you, they never do.
And he was right, and I didn't believe him
Yeah.
6 years ago.
How many of the 17 joined after the units were all built?
None.
None.
None. So everybody was in the middle of the
Right,
process.
the way it went is, and this is going to be a generalization, because I have to drop the timeline this way. We got the land in July of 2009. We then, Susan and I took a vacation, and we started, and in September, we did a book signing.
Actually, it was October.
Was it October? We jumped through the book signing?
Yep.
Okay, in October, we did a book signing at the bookstore in Mountain View, where Chuck, Direct, who had just written the senior co-housing book, gave a presentation. We had about 100 people came to that presentation. ABC News got real interested, and they did a piece for us, which was very helpful. It was a 2.5-minute, really good piece on senior co-housing. The land, and interviewing Susan and Chuck, and a bunch of other things. It was a great promotional piece for us that we got for free. And when we started the design, there was a series of 4 or 5 design workshops. We did 4 of them. And we did the first design workshop in January. We had 8 members of the 19. Okay. Then over the next,
That's good.
and then over the next 3 or 4 years, we picked up more members and got up to around 13 or 14.
Right.
And then in the last year, we picked up the rest of them. So as one of our members said, you have the pioneers, that's like the 8 who start this thing, right? There's nothing there, they gotta start with imagination, a piece of property, and vision, and they're willing to take higher risk. And then you get the settlers who come in when there's kind of an infrastructure and they can see what they're gonna get, and they feel more comfortable about the whole thing being defined. And then at the end, you get the residents who say, oh, this is a done deal, there's no risk here, I'll put my time in.
And I like it.
And I like it.
So, let's see, where were we?
You were taking money from people.
Yes, right, okay, yes, so the money that we took from people was what we needed to get from the start of it to the construction loan. And,
Well, what we thought we might do.
right, what we thought we might need, yeah.
Anyway, now, another thing in terms of financing is, as I mentioned to you, we needed a $13.5 million construction loan. Well, construction loans are recourse loans. What does a recourse loan mean? It means that if you don't pay it, you have to have collateral put up, like your house, and then the bank can take your house and sell it to pay off the loan. So, one of the issues that cohousing has to figure out when they go into construction is how to handle the guarantees of a construction loan. And the way that we did it, we decided to do this early on, is we met with a series of general contractors and development organizations to see if we might want to partner with them, or they may want to partner with us to build this development. And we ended up with a large or medium-sized San Jose developer called Barry Swenson Builder. If you ever ride around San Jose, you see lots of Barry Swenson Builder signs all over the place. And Barry met us, I think in, I don't know when, 2012 maybe. And just when we were going through the entitlement process, and we had a very hard entitlement process, which we'll get into a little bit. And Barry was very impressed with how we got ourselves through this, so we offered Susan a job doing entitlement for Barry Swenson Builder.
Several times.
Several times. And he thought Susan was about the neatest woman he ever met. And I agreed. And anyway, and it was in the downturn, and Swenson was struggling for survival. And so he decided that they would do it. They would guarantee the construction loan. And the negotiated price was $1 million if we guaranteed the loan. So that became part of our cost content of the building.
That was his fee.
But it was his fee. They would guarantee the construction loan, and they came up with a couple $100,000 in additional equity that we needed, and they did a few other things for $1 million.
Well, and also they're the ones who have contacts with the banks, because the banks didn't know us from Adam.
Right, and we were coming out of a very difficult, after the crash, we were coming out of a very difficult financing situation, and even Swenson was having trouble prior to, we started building in 2013. They were having trouble even getting their projects financed, because the banks were basically had locked up. And then they were just starting to let money go when we went in for financing, and I think it would have been very hard for us to get as individuals to get a construction loan. But there was a bank called Mechanics Bank which wanted to do direct financing with Swenson, Barry Swenson Builder, this as part of their business development. And so we had no trouble getting the financing.
Also, very often, instead of just one bank, you get one lead bank and a syndicate of several other banks that will go in on construction loans. So it can be pretty complicated. It was helpful to have a development organization and general contractor who knew how to structure these things.
The other thing that Swenson had, which we'll get into as well, is they were more than a general contractor. They do a lot of general contracting, but they also do a lot of development. So they have their own architectural group, and so we thought it would be useful for us to use their architectural group to do what's called construction drawings. So Chuck did all the conceptual drawings, and he normally does the construction drawings, but we decided that it would be in our interest to have Swenson do the construction drawings, so that if there were mistakes in the drawings, and during construction, we weren't going to have the general contractor saying,
Pointing
fingers, your architect screwed up, therefore, and these extra costs go to you.
This is called a design build process.
Yeah, we'll get into that, but this way, the finger pointing is at each, is at themselves,
Right.
which was actually very helpful.
Because there were a lot of errors.
Yeah, but I think we should back up and maybe start with what was the entitlement process.
Yeah,
Does
let's
that
talk
make
about
sense?
entitlement means.
Sure, and I would definitely go through the entitlement process, but, you had a difficult one, like you had the whole secret things, we can
Right.
touch lightly on that.
Yeah,
We're hoping
we will.
to not buy any properties that are potentially.
Right, well, okay.
We didn't think we did.
Yeah.
These are
Right.
the surprises.
But beyond that, I mean, without talking about the farmhouse, which we will very briefly, I mean, what we didn't know is that as part of getting a
design.
entitlement and design.
Approved by the city means entitlement, entitled to build.
Entitled to build, which means then you can go ahead and do construction drawings and get building permits. But as the first step is to get the approval. First of all, we spent a lot of time meeting with every city council member and telling them what we were doing and why we were doing and why it would be so good for Mountain View. We really cultivated every single council member
And the stakeholders.
many times. And that was very important. We held sort of open houses on the property to let the neighborhood know what we were doing, come over, meet us, see what we're building, so that there would be no surprises. We wanted it to be really transparent. I mean, this was really our goal. And but I was going to say, but there are certain procedures that you have to go through. We had to have a soil engineer, a structural engineer, a civil engineer, an acoustic engineer, a traffic engineer, a landscape architect. All of these reports are part of the entitlement process. And so that's part of the money and part of the time is just paying
For all these
these consultants and their reports.
Before you have any approvals.
Before you have any approvals. I mean, you know, while the architect, the conceptual architect, in this case Chuck Durrett, is doing the workshops and the plans, you also have to have all of these other studies done. Then there's also what is called CEQA, and that stands for the California Environmental Quality Act. They have a long checklist of what the impacts will be in many areas, you know, from soil and environment to, what's the word? And traffic, no, but the word I'm looking for, to historical things, which we had no idea about. So, and no, it's all part of, and the CEQA checklist, which is multi-pages, used to be filled out by the staff of the planning department
in 2 weeks of work.
in 2 weeks of work. What has happened is because there's a lot of legal liability in this, the city of Mountain View and probably most jurisdictions now in the state do not do their own CEQA checklists. Instead, they send it out to a special CEQA consultant. So there's another expense. And then the CEQA consultants, because you're paying them to find things, that's how they earn their money, are going to come up with all kinds of things that otherwise would be not something that would be brought to anybody's attention. So that's regardless of whether you have an historic house on the property.
So what happened to us when we bought the property? It had an 1885 farmhouse on it. We did our due diligence.
It was
found out
not
that it was not historic. It had been for a whole variety of reasons, two major reasons. And so when we closed on the property and we started the entitlement project, we went to meet our planning representative in the city. There was a person in the city in the planning department that was going to be our entitlement staff member that we were going to work with.
Right.
And her name was Stephanie. And Stephanie, the first thing she said, you went and met with her first, said, what are you going to do about your historic house? And we said, we don't have a historic house. And she said, well, I think it is. And she was right, because what had happened is there had been some California case law that had, at the time we bought it,
In
made
Fresno.
it, well, wherever.
Yeah, but I mean, it wasn't local.
Right, they had made the house historic.
Right.
So the house went from non-historic to historic because of some court cases, case law.
Can I just interrupt really quickly, because I'm a city planner and I know CEQA really well on this?
Sure.
Just to be really brief, because I don't want to scare people off too much, but the reality is that any building over 50 years old is potentially historic.
Right.
And then, you know, if it's under 50 years old, then you're you're clean unless it's on a local register or something where it's obviously, you know, important or.
And the reason 50 years old is really the right number is one of the CEQA validations is the house is indicative of one of the key development phases of California. And so, in our case, it was part of, in 1885, the large ranches were broken up, in our area, the Santa Clara Valley, broken up into 12-acre orchards. It's the first subdivision. And so that farmhouse represented the small orchard period of the development of the Santa Clara Valley.
But the second one it represented was when they, in the 1950s, subdivided and kept their acre, and then apartments and schools and things were built around them. That represented presented a second.
Post-World War II.
Post-World War
But
II
we got that one taken off, that was beyond.
And I think the good news on that is that back when you were doing this, planners were just getting the word out, it's like, oh my God, it's over 50 years old, it's historic, blah, blah, blah. It was like they didn't know what to do with it.
Right.
They were erring on the side of being very conservative.
Maybe they were.
And a lot of cities will, that's why you need to have somebody who really knows their stuff to put it in the proper context and make sure that they're not overreacting, but they're still doing the job that they need to
That's
do
true.
with the cheapest.
That's
And
right.
the other complication, we had Stephanie had just been made the head of historic preservation for
Oh,
Mountain View.
yes. And, yes, and was very, very dedicated.
Very good. We had other words for it.
Yeah.
In any case, let me just say that because we have this historic farmhouse, which is still on the property, but we were able to modify, and it was state law that the city council had to abide by, because otherwise they would have been happy to let us do what we wanted. We were able to move the farmhouse and modify the structure,
Cut it back in size.
and orient it on the property so that it became part of our development. But in order to do this, so we knew that city council was fine with this, and everybody was fine with this, we had to go through an EIR in order to give the city legal cover so that they could do what was called an overriding consideration, and so we could do what we wanted.
What that means is the EIR said, this house, if you do what you want to do with it, it will destroy its historicity in an unmitigatable way. There's nothing you can do
Right,
to mitigate you destroying its historicity.
Right.
Okay?
right,
The city council can then say, we will agree to allow you to do it because we think the benefit to the city overrides the historic
And they-
significance of what you're destroying.
and they have the legal right to
And
do
they have
that.
a legal right to do that, and then they can't be sued by
The whole
preservation.
point is to not get sued.
So
The
you
whole
know,
point is to not get
Because when the
sued.
city gets sued, it costs them $500,000, and so the city attorney's job is, don't get us sued.
Right.
Right, so that cost us a year,
And $250,000.
right.
I was just gonna say, how much did that cost you? Yeah.
$250,000.
Right,
But one thing I must say, Mountain View was, and this is partly because it's Mountain View, partly because we had spent a lot of time with city council people discussing the issue, is in the meeting where we were approved, first of all, we got all 7 votes of the city council for entitlement, and all of these councils, except for the mayor, who couldn't do it because of the conflict of interest, gave staff direction to find a way to get us and the other 6 people in Mountain View that had a similar potential situation, some compensation for having to keep these houses.
Wow.
So the city waived $650,000 in fees to help pay for us keeping the house. And I think very few jurisdictions would have done this, and it's certainly the Mountain View's credit.
right, so it was for the EIR and it was for the rehab of the farmhouse.
Right.
So essentially covered our costs, and that's great.
You have a question?
So how much did it cost, I guess, to get through all of this sort of entitlement period, and who paid for that?
You have to pay for it yourself. So,
I was gonna say, the funding came from all the money that we got from our members.
right.
So from those 8 original people that each
No,
put in
No, as we
700,
recruited more and more members.
We got, first of all, we got $1.3 million in to buy the land and begin the design entitlement process. Okay? And I think, I can't remember out of the entitlement money, I think something like $750,000 went into the land, and the rest we had to begin the development process. Then as people came in, we got the 10%, and in our case, we were lucky that we got people in fast enough that the 10% carried us through, almost. Then 2 of them, our members, ended up coming up with $1 million loan to the development company, in addition to 10% to purchase the land, basically. But we had to pay off the construction loan.
But we had to
Not
pay off
construction,
the
the
land loan in
land,
order
yeah.
to get the construction.
Right.
Right, so, yeah,
Well, we
so,
had to do it before the construction loan
Right,
because
right.
it was due.
right.
So
But-
until the construction loan was sort of like 1.8, no, something $2 million-ish dollars, and that was split between 8 people.
The construction loan,
I'm
I'm
sorry.
sorry, you mean the land loan, you mean?
No, the money to get to the construction loan, is that what you mean?
Yes.
That was from,
We needed a total of about $4.5 million, plus the land, actually, we needed more than that, we needed about $5.5 million. And we got to it through our initial investors that put in $1.3 million, and then our members who put in about $3 million
over the course of
over the
getting,
course of the time.
right,
And then at the end, our developer put in another $200,000 to cover. the
just to get
shortfall.
us that little shortfall. No, I was gonna say, now let me tell you how long this process took. We got entitlement from the city in September of 2012. So we went from July of 2009 to September of 2012 to get entitlement, and a part of that was losing a year because of the farmhouse.
So it's 3 years.
Okay, so just to give you a time frame on this.
That was what I was trying to figure out, is because at that stage, you don't even know whether you can build this
Correct.
idea,
Right.
right?
That's
And so I'm
right.
just trying to figure out who the people are that sort of took that risk up front of like not even knowing if
The
you can
pioneers.
The pioneers.
build it. And that was those 8 families that were early.
And then a couple more that came in.
Yeah,
So
a couple
you had-
more. By the time we got entitlement, I think we were up to about 12 or 13. Okay, but
What
they
happens
didn't-
is as you get through
Thanks.
entitlement, you get a design, you got concept design, you
got a lot to show people.
All of a sudden you can see this is what it's gonna look like, and here's what my apartment's gonna be, or my
And
unit's
where it's
gonna
gonna
be.
be, and, I mean,
And so
they're
it
great
gains more,
pictures.
reality as time goes on.
Right, so the entitlement drawings, it's about 35 pages, and lots of beautiful color renderings. Okay. So, and part of the entitlement process for us, in addition to the farmhouse, was also the city of Mountain View has what's the word I'm looking for, architectural review committee. And so, just a little anecdote, because there are so many little things that
It's
come
a
up.
design review committee.
Design review committee, so we wanted to have the trash enclosure on the street where it would be easy for the garbage collectors to collect the garbage and easy for our members to bring their garbage to. The design review committee wanted us to put it in the garage, which is down the ramp. And in order to get it collected, you have to pull it up the ramp to the street.
Steep ramp to push dumpsters up.
Right, and we said, we're not gonna do that. Well, it took us 3 tries, and Chuck Durant finally built a very lovely model of what we call our temple to recycling.
Change the name.
Changed the name, we actually had them pass the model around and look at it, and they finally agreed to allow us to build our temple to recycling at street level, and it's really quite nice. That's another example.
And pretty much every municipality has a design review board.
That's
You
right.
can't go through
Right,
with the
that's right.
entitlements
And
without going
it's
through that
everything,
process.
it's everything from what the windows look like, to the colors that you're using, to the roofing material you're using, I mean, it's very
I just
detailed.
want to warn you, if you start out as a progressive, you over time start to become much more conservative. You see all the regulation, and you see the craziness of the regulation. So for instance, because we were a multi-story, 3-unit building with an elevator, everything had to be ADA compatible.
Every unit, instead of the normal development where only 5 or 10% have to be
Right.
ADA. I also will say, and again, this is the learning process, we now know why, at least in our area, the developers like to build these townhomes one after the other, because they're considered single-family homes. The kind of building we built has the most regulations and the most code requirements of anything that can be built. So as a result, developers just want to stay away from it. We didn't know that when we started.
Because it was one building?
Because it's multi-story.
It's a multi-unit building
Stack.
with 3
It's
stories
with
and an elevator.
stack units,
And an
so.
elevator.
That is true, that's absolutely true. There's a project that I'm working on now where fire code access, if you make anything accessible, everything's accessible.
Right.
There's all kinds of things that
Right.
you have to work out.
And because we had the elevator, if we had no elevator, then nothing had to be.
And the fire codes can be, and then there's fire codes from your local fire chief,
Right.
Oh, yes.
which are very arbitrary.
Right, we're gonna tell you one little anecdote, just one, because what we learned is that there will be things that make absolutely no
Right.
sense whatsoever. You can't try to rationalize it, you just have to say, okay, we'll do it. All right, so the buildings we had designed had external walkways. And the front doors to each unit opened onto these external walkways, so they're elevated, like a motel style. So there are columns that have to hold up the walkways. And Chuck Durant designed them with steel columns, which makes a lot of sense. And they look nice, everything. When we were going through the code requirements with the fire chief, he said,
When we were going through the construction.
well, I'm just saying code requirements with the fire chief. I just didn't want to, the timing doesn't matter. The fire chief said, no, you can't use steel columns, because if there's a
The
fire,
building's burning, okay, there's units.
right, building's burning, these are outside columns, so they're not inside the building, they're on the walkways. If the building's burning, you can get a catastrophic failure if the steel
Right, so in other words, people are gonna stand on the walkways watching the fire next to them until the columns heat up enough to melt and fail. But if the columns are wood and they're burning, you, instead
Well,
of
I was
saying.
gonna say, wait, but you jumping ahead. So what did he want us to use?
Wood.
Wood.
Okay.
So we use wood columns.
I'll give one other example. We have outside, we have a couple of, one outside staircase that comes down the outside, goes around corners and comes down.
Right.
And we had at the turn, it's outside, we had storage units in there. He said, oh no, you can't have a storage unit there. Someone running down that staircase might think
On the
that's,
outside.
on the outside, that's the exit. And they're gonna stand there trying to get into that
There's a
closet
closet.
instead of going down the staircase to get away from the fire.
So anyway, I just wanted to say, you gotta be prepared when you're going through the design process and the construction drawings for all kinds of code issues that come up. The fire sprinklers, the acoustics, we had to have strobe units because fire alarms alone aren't enough. You have to be able to, for somebody who's deaf, to have visual strobe. I mean, it just went on and on and on.
And all this comes in, you don't know at the beginning, it comes in as you go.
That's right. Nobody tells you ahead of time.
And a lot of it's not code, it's discretion of the people in the city, the fire marshal, fire people who don't like this, don't like that. So there's a lot of subjective stuff
Right.
which are
Right.
Anyway,
Okay, so I think we should probably move on from entitlement to construction drawings,
Right.
the pre-construction time, because there are some really critical things to look out for here. One is that there are two kind of different philosophies of, methods of building. One is called design build, and one is called building to specification. And those are the kind of two extremes. Design build means that you have your framing, and the plumbers know that you have to have plumbing, and the electricians know you have to have electrical outlets, and you just let them go in and design as they build. And that's less expensive. But if you want to have your particular light switch in one particular place, and if you want to have your radiator or whatever heater you have in one particular location, and you want these kinds of plumbing fixtures and location, then you have to specify as much as possible what you want where and what the product is going to be, and as trying it down as precisely as possible. Well, people who are designing their own units typically want a lot of say in what goes where, and some people are smarter than others who've never been through it and don't give people that much say in where their light switches are going to be. We didn't know that. So we were very insistent on our specifications. It is really, really, really important, if you want it, to specify everything down to the doorknobs, down to the toilet paper holders, the light fixtures, the doorbells, the appliances, everything. We specified everything, the towel bar, everything.
and we had a committee who worked a year and a half during the entitlement process
To put
get
together this
the
list.
We started doing it by consensus and decided it would take about a century to do it. And so we gave it to the committee to.
Right, right. A lot of decisions, by the way, get made.
If you were to do this again, would you do it the less expensive way?
No,
The design
I
build?
would not, because you get a kludge, you don't know what you're gonna get.
We had a builder in Walnut Creek who said, just give us your conceptual drawings and we'll do it for $1 million less than what the other people are quoting.
But by doing design build.
Right.
So, I mean, when a developer's just building something that's, you're only gonna see the final product and a buyer takes it or leaves it, it's a different story.
We're also doing what's called production housing. And trying to get the price down, we've got to do it in a certain way.
So
And-
everybody had to have the same everything.
Right.
The same faucets, the same counters, the same kitchen sinks, the same toilets, same flooring, same cabinets,
Right.
same window, on and on and on.
Right.
So, sorry, the eraser just escaped. Anyway, then there's what's called the specification book or spec book, and that is a document this thick, which talks about what every subcontractor is required to do, what specification they have to build to. it is really, really important that the construction drawings and the specification book and the specifications that you as a group develop are all
The same.
consistent
And complete.
and complete. And that is a huge task. And we wanted to have an owner's rep that would do that task for us, and we were not successful in finding one.
Well, we found one, and he wasn't successful in doing it.
Right. I was gonna
They
say,
brought
yeah,
the high
we went
wrong
through,
person.
we
They
hired.
interviewed me and they didn't
So
hire
we
me.
had
There you are, absolutely.
So it's true. And so it took a year to get the construction drawings done correctly, as much as we could. There were still mistakes, but mostly they were all right. And then it took, I'm sorry.
Let me just say,
Go ahead.
one thing is, when we did the construction drawings, we had Swenson do the construction drawings. And as Linda pointed out, they're a design-build firm more than a custom-building firm. So we got, our construction drawing set was about 160 sheets, drawings, okay? If it had been a custom development, it probably would have been about 220 sheets, with a lot more detail of how certain things were put together. And that differential between the two, we got something between a design-build set and a construction set. We got something in the middle, a hybrid. And part of the problems we ran into were not having enough detailed drawings done to work out issues that came up during construction.
Right, right,
That caused cost in play.
right. Right, so,
Does anybody have any questions at this point? Any burning questions?
Yeah, we were going through an awful lot of information.
I know, it's a lot to take in. Okay.
I think we're all kind of like deer in headlights.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't be scared.
By the way, just to let you know, I mean, this is, Susan and I, at the end of this process, will have total of 20,000 hours of our time into this project.
Over the 5 years,
Over the,
6
yes,
years.
more than that, 6 years.
Did you find it worth it?
Ask us in a year, we're just getting ready to move in.
Well, the reason we haven't moved in is that our unit's been ready, but we've been working so hard on the project, we haven't had the time to go through the stuff in our house and get ready to move. We're almost there.
So what happened was our Barry Swenson builder basically did not do a good job managing the project for a whole variety of reasons.
Right, but we're still in the pre-construction phase.
And we had to jump in and become part of the project management team, and that kept us from being able to get ready to sell the house.
So let me go back to we're still in the pre-construction phase. Okay, so anyway, right, so then what you're doing, it took the first set of construction drawings was ready in May of 2013. So we've gotten entitlement in September of 2012. Then the first set of construction drawings was ready to submit to the city for the review process. The building department reviews the plans. The plans went back and forth 3 times.
It's very typical though.
It's very typical and took several months because at this point the housing situation had improved and all of a sudden the city was inundated with plans. And also plans from Google and plans from LinkedIn and plans from Facebook, and all of a sudden, you know, their load went way up and they were saturated. So it took a long time just to get the turnaround. But we finally got, so from May when it was submitted, we finally got building permits in February of 2013. Got that's how long it took. Got the construction loan ready to go, everything ready to go, working with Barry Swenson Builders, and started construction in March of 2013. So, just to give you an idea. So, I think if there's no more questions about the pre-construction phase, now we'll jump ahead to the construction.
Anything else about process or?
Well, I think, it's a lot of information.
I know,
And
sorry about that,
I
guys.
don't know about everybody else, but I'm overwhelmed.
Okay.
So I think it might be a good idea to kind of wrap things up in the next 10
Okay.
minutes or so.
That's fine, sure.
And also open it up, we need to open it up for questions.
Absolutely, that's fine.
Thank you.
Well, I guess where I would wrap versus going over, you know, challenges of during construction is just overall either something that you would do different or words of wisdom for the next group if you thought that they would ever do it again, or you know, besides sequence, certain things you can't really super anticipate, you know.
I think the places where we made mistakes was, first of all, we didn't get a good, we thought we were getting a good owner's rep, and we didn't. We ended up going through 6 owner's reps.
6 what?
Owner's reps.
Representatives.
Right, so the owner's reps, we wanted to start with the construction drawings, to vet the construction drawings, and then help monitor the construction. Okay, and for a variety of reasons, we ended up going through 6. We finally ended up with a very good person who helped us at a very critical time, but that was a real problem. Secondly, is we should have spent money with Chuck to go over Swenson's construction drawings and check them for completeness and consistency. But it was like going to be an extra $40,000, and we just didn't want to spend the money at the time. And I didn't think it was necessary because of our owner's rep. And
Well,
that turned out not to.
And I think also you kind of, you know, like when you do your drawings for entitlements, that's really schematic.
Right.
That's
And then
correct.
you went right to CDs, and you kind of skipped over design development, where you actually work out a lot of the details before you actually get into.
Well, they were
it.
supposed
But
to do that.
They were supposed to give you.
Yeah, that was
CD
part of the
also.
architectural
Oh, yeah,
contract we had with
part
Barrett
of the
Swinson
DVDs,
Building. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. So we didn't.
We had DVDs and CDs.
okay.
How did you find your contractor? What was this in the process?
We got, one we went with was recommended to us by the county assessor in Santa Clara County. And in fact, he went to the first meeting with us, and which helped. And then we found, Chuck had one other that he built with a lot, and we found, I don't know how we found the third one. So we went out in the entitlement period, we went out for, once we had the conceptual drawings done, we went out for some budgetary quotes for 3 different groups to see what it was. They were all pretty close. And just to get an idea of kind of a sanity check on what this thing was going to cost to build.
There's a question over here, guys.
Oh yeah, how did it turn out?
Great.
It's beautiful.
What's it
Yeah,
like?
it's
great.
it's
It's
amazing.
great.
And every time I walk around it, I can't believe we did it.
Yeah, it's really
It's
great.
very impressive.
How much did each, a level of 3 levels of units cost?
Oh,
Ian,
there's no difference between,
well, let me just say,
it's only by size,
Well, what's the difference in the cost of
the
the
smaller
size?
units ended up around
830.
850, well, 850, if you look at, depending on discounts and stuff. But I'd say average around 840, 850. The,
And they're
and those
about
are
1,400 square feet.
The small ones?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Oh, yeah.
The medium ones were 1765, we had 3 different designs for them, and those ended up being what, 1.1 something?
1,150,000.
Right.
And they're about 1,750 to 1,800 square feet.
And then the larger units around 1980 to 2100, and they were around 1.3.
1.35.
Did you consider making them, I mean, that seems like a lot of space for a couple to me, even 1,200 feet seems like pretty generous.
Well, again, because we're constrained by the
Right.
size of the lot and
We
the
could
costs
only,
to build it.
we could only, think of it this way, we could only build 19 units. Let's say we built 19 small units, then we would have gotten half as much money. And it wouldn't have covered the land cost, the underground garage cost, the development cost, because all those costs are fixed costs.
Yeah, you know, whether you're building 50 units or whether you're building 30 units, there's not a lot of difference
In the entitlement period.
period. And plans.
And land costs.
Got it.
What are the ongoing costs? What do people pay per month or a year?
You mean in terms of homeowners
Project
fees?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, first of all,
Insurance, water bills.
homeowners fees include gas, water, so that's your heat and hot water, and sewer, water, sewer, garbage, landscape, things that you, insurance, so things that if you had a single family home, you'd be paying for. And our dues are about $600 a month, $700, but it's self-managed. And that makes a big difference. You don't have a professional management company.
We have, right now, we have 8 teams that run the place.
Right.
And we started a conversion from the committees that we had to develop it, get it built, to the teams we're going to have to run it. And the reason we went from committees to teams because we decided we had too many committees. So we changed the name. Yes.
What about communal space?
We have about 6,000, we built 38,000 square feet above ground, including the farmhouse. We have about 6,000 feet of common facility. And that includes the dining room, kitchen, living room on one level of the common house. On the second level of the common house, we have an exercise room, a media room, and a crafts room. And then on the third, we have a big outside seating deck.
A roof deck.
Roof deck. And then we have the farmhouse, which is being developed into an apartment and a guest room and a meeting area. We think the apartment in time will be used for a shared caregiver, if people get older and need some help.
But in the meantime,
Meantime,
we
there's a guest facility, or for
Right.
people who are interested in co-housing, would like to live with us for a month or so, and get to see how it all works, to live in the farmhouse.
And in terms of the housing units, how do they fall into 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom?
2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, and 4 bedroom.
Okay, so the smaller ones had 2 bedrooms.
Yes,
Plus room.
yeah, and a little.
No plus room.
How big is the site?
1.2 acres.
At what point, I assume there are condominium ownership?
Yes,
Yeah,
that's
it's on
correct.
condominium ownership.
So you had to have CCNRs?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
all that,
Uh-huh,
and
uh-huh.
did you have an attorney?
Jeff
Oh, yeah.
Wagner.
We use very good attorneys, who really knew what they were doing, and it saved us a lot of money by having good attorneys.
Would you build more smaller units? Would you
Yes.
find there was demand for that you
Yes.
didn't?
Yes,
Yes, you would
originally
have.
we thought it was zoned for 20, we would have built 10 small, 6 medium, and 4 large. When we found that out, that we couldn't do that, we had to reconfigure and still make that target, we still had to pay, we still had to get a certain amount.
Of money out
Of
of
money
it,
out of it.
to cover all the expenses.
So it went to 6 small, 9 medium, and 4 large. And that was because of the money, I mean, that's what dictated it, the money that we had to get when we sold these things.
If I could just add one thing to that, in California, there's something called density bonuses, where if you build homes that are more affordable or within, some affordability range, or senior housing, or rental housing, whatever it is that the community really needs, you can actually get greater density. Some communities just flat out will tell you,
Couldn't do it.
that's what the law allows you to do, but that's not gonna fly, so it depends on where you
Well,
are, but there might be an opportunity.
Actually, let me tell you where it did work for us. Because we wanted to put a kitchenette in the farmhouse. If we didn't put anything in the farmhouse, no problem. But because we wanted to put a kitchenette in the farmhouse, they said, oh, that's another unit, but we'll give you the density
They
bonus.
give us a density.
Oh, okay, good, something.
So, although it's it can't be deeded separately, it belongs to the homeowners association, so it's kind of a quasi 20th unit.
So this did not require, the city did not require any of these to be affordable, strictly
No, it was
affordable.
part of the fee that they waived.
You pay the fee.
We had what's called below market rent units, called BMR units.
You
Right.
do.
We were supposed
Supposed to have
to, but we could pay,
In
we would pay in lieu of building the units. And so we were prepared to pay about $600,000 or $700,000 or $600,000 in BMR fees, not to have those 2 units. We wouldn't have made we wouldn't
So
have built.
the city waived those fees?
Yes, they waived the
Yes, they
fees because of the historic
Wow.
farmhouse.
That's pretty good.
That's
So
amazing.
you kind of got, yeah.
And there's just one guest room, is that what you said?
Well, 2 actually, and one of them has an ensuite bathroom and the other one doesn't.
But everyone, because the units are large enough, people are staying in people's units, their daughter or son comes over, their friend comes over, they've got an extra room.
Not only that, but even if they don't have an extra room, their neighbor has an extra room. I mean, it's very friendly that way, so.
Do you have children in the complex?
That was the elephant in the room for our whole development, was senior versus multi-generational versus whatever. And we did more workshops and issues about this, because we had people who felt strongly about wanting their children in the community, we had people who felt strongly about not having small children in the community. And it was a continuous issue with us, and it probably still is.
Never got solved.
So you're not legally age restricted?
No, we're not legally age restricted,
The only
but
way- the only-
self-selection helps.
The age restriction because we're not 35 units, would have been 65 or older.
Oh.
You have to be
When
30.
did you 55?
No, state law.
Very well, you have to get to deed restricted 55, you have to have 35 units or more.
To deed restrict to 65, I think it's 23 units.
No, we're allowed to deed restricted 65.
Oh, you're right, you're right. We would have been able to deed restrict to 65, but we didn't want to do that.
So can you talk a little bit about the communal aspects
Yes.
of this facility and your process for defining expectations around contribution to the community and engagement with the community, life separate versus life within in the community. Can you just, at a high level, you don't have to go into tremendous detail, but just sort of paint the picture?
I think that part of the thing that kept us going on this through a lot of hard work was the people. As we built the community, I mean, we really enjoyed the people, we enjoyed working together. A lot of people picked up a lot of the work. 20,000 hours didn't come to 30,000 hours without a lot of the work that other people put in. And so we were building a human community at the same time that you built a physical facility. And we did a lot of, you might say, development of that. We did consensus management workshops. We did conflict resolution workshops.
Facilitation
workshops. I mean, we did a lot to deal with it. We had some conflicts. We had certain of us that were pretty good at trying to work with individuals to try to get certain things resolved, or at least get people to stop getting on people's cases. There's a lot of that. Now that we're in the running it, we'll face another level of that, is so-and-so isn't doing very much work, and I'm doing much more work than that person is. We had our first workshop along those lines. We had an educational committee in throughout the whole process. What do you call it?
Edu-training.
Education and training. And the woman who ran it did a really good job. And so we did a number of workshops with outside people facilitating, who really helped in terms of dealing with a lot of these issues.
Do you have a number of hours people have to contribute to the community?
Yes, but I can't remember what it is.
It's 7 hours per week.
Oh, okay.
Do you have pets?
Yeah.
Yes.
So we have rules for pets.
Right. So dogs have to be on a leash held by an adult if they're outside.
What's the age range?
About
Early
55 to 85.
Yeah.
I'd say our average age is probably 60, late 60s.
How are you handling community meals?
We have a 3-week,
Mm-hmm.
and so we have one on Tuesdays, Thursdays. Is it
Monday,
Monday, Thursday, and then a brunch on the weekend.
And is there like a food committee, or people are just volunteering, or how's it all kind
Well,
of
we have a
about?
committee. We have a committee.
A team.
A team. No committees. Interiors.
Or
and-
is it community life? I don't remember which one.
I can't remember. Anyway,
Somebody is.
They help. I mean, we have sign-up lists, and so right now it's 3 people preparing the meals. We have a head chef, a sous chef, and a setup cleanup person. And we're sort of doing this. We've been doing this now for about 3 months. And we're trying to get the price down to $7 a month.
A meal.
A meal.
Yeah.
That's pretty nice.
Yeah.
So we're learning. I mean, we're at the Novit stage of this whole.
Okay, yeah, I don't have the picture with me. We had one exciting time. I was preparing a meal for the first time, and I was broiling some fish, and the smoke alarm went off.
We discovered one design defect. and that was not putting an exhaust hood over the oven.
Yeah, with broilers. And unlike in your own home, if the smoke alarm goes off, you can just air out the place and it'll stop. The fire alarm doesn't stop, and the fire department. So it was very exciting. So we have a wonderful photograph with my fish and the fire department. Anyway, yeah.
Okay, any other questions? No? Is there anything that you wanted to say? I know I'm cutting a little bit short, but I.
Well, one of the nice things that happened was that we did have all of the units sold before the construction was completed.
That's great.
So we paid off the construction loan, and construction's still going on.
Right. So we saved about $300,000 on interest charges on the construction.
Yeah.
That's what you did right. So what other things would you say that you did right, that you're glad you did?
We were fast learners.
Yeah, I think we did a lot of things right. I think we managed a difficult situation well. Our senior VP at Swenson told us if it wasn't for Susan and I, the project would have failed. We'd be incomplete now, we'd be in court.
We maintained a totally collaborative relationship the
Through
whole
very
way.
difficult times.
And we were just pretty much, we were on the staff for.
We became problem solvers along with them. I mean, one of the problems they ran into is they went from no business to too much business, and an inability to hire people in the area because of the construction boom.
Yep.
And so they were, trying to keep above water on all their projects. And so we became free de facto project managers. I mean, there was a time about 2 years ago where I was going nuts because we had hundreds of items that were issues that weren't getting addressed properly. Susan went back to her notes and put together a to-do list of 150 to 200 items that we then started to manage through meetings to try to get our arms around the whole thing.
And actually managed,
And
I mean,
managed.
you know, I mean.
And then we came up with ideas about how to solve issues. I mean, we were part of the
And
design
products.
team. So instead of just sitting there, bitching, why aren't you guys doing a better job? You're not doing this, your quality's bad here, blah, 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 blah.
Well, just quick example. We weren't getting the response we needed in terms of the radiator installation. So David called
I emailed the manufacturer in Germany
in Germany.
to get information that
Because
people
they were
here
German
were coming up
products.
with. We couldn't get a response from the elevator people. We were
Right.
trying to get the elevator in. I called the country manager back east and said, why aren't you guys paying attention to us?
Just all kinds of stuff.
Because they're not used to going
Right.
above.
You were your own project.
Mediating between subcontractors and the GC in terms of disputes. I mean, we're really in it. So hopefully you will have
With some of the
development partner who can really do
Right.
what we've done.
But I think a project is only, I mean, there's a saying in the construction trade, is your project is only good to your subcontractors. We had 4 bad contractors. Our framing contractor screwed up, he was 4 months behind schedule, went bankrupt. And with all sorts of problems. Because of the delay in framing, we started doing roughings ahead of time, so we got out of sequence in the production job. So imagine having all these people on site, that's when our construction supervisor lost control of the project.
And he was sick.
And he was sick, and the QA guy was incompetent.
He got fired.
He got fired.
I mean, you just
We had our electrical contractor was a problem.
Still is.
Our cabinet, still is, our cabinet contractor was a problem, and our plumber made a giant mistake.
But
Has been quite good at trying to correct it. So he basically ordered the wrong brand of radiators, and a lot of wrong sizes.
So with it being design build like that, I've never done a design build project, frankly.
This was
Did they have a submittal process with you?
Yes, but Swen, we had early on told Swenson that their submittal tracking was effective for drivers. And they fought us and said, we know what the hell we're doing, we're experts at this. And because their submittal tracking
It
was
fell
weak.
through
it
And
fell
so
through.
nobody outside of Swenson was looking at the submittal?
No, we were.
Oh, you were?
But the way, and the whole.
Anyway,
they've now gone to online submittal tracking, which they needed.
We helped them. Anyway, we got a lot of job offers.
We'll be very good at the next one.
We really appreciate you taking
Yes,
the
thank
time.
you so
to
much.
So are you ready to build a project?
Anyway, I want to thank all of you for coming today. We've got a few little refreshments here. I've got some water. And there's books here. So if you don't, I'll tell you, if you don't have a co-housing book, I highly recommend you get one so you can start reading the good news too. There is good news. So just know for all the difficult challenges that we have in life, we have all the positive too. So that'll be the next meeting.
See, they're not regretting that.
There was a famous quote there was the National Cohousing meeting was held in 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And Kate McKenna gave a keynote, and she said, cohousing is the longest, most difficult, most expensive self-improvement program.
Anyway, thanks so much for coming. Help yourself to the utilities, and thank you so much, Claudette, for bringing the stuff. And
We're happy to hang around.
yeah,
Yeah,
questions.
right.
Okay. I'm gonna stick